Welcome back, everybody, to Jake Writes a Book. My name is Jake, and today we are going to get to the bottom of Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Okay, let's start with a little background. Flannery O'Connor was born on March 25th, 1925, in Savannah, Georgia. She was a prolific writer of short stories whose works often included violence, morally questionable characters, and small pockets of grace that reflected her Catholic beliefs. Flannery O'Connor's famous short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, follows our protagonist, an elderly woman simply referred to as grandmother, on a road trip with her family to Florida. The family seems normal at first, but their flaws become readily apparent. Grandmother's son, Bailey, functions as the ineffectual and incompetent patriarch of the family. Bailey is a quiet, grumpy, and inattentive father to his children, husband to his wife, and son to his mother. It should be noted that Bailey's wife is also weak, ineffectual, and completely drained by her terrible husband and children. Bailey's wife isn't even named. The two grandkids, June Star and Wesley, are two mouthy, disrespectful twerps who insult adults and frequently terrorize their parents. This wonderful family decides to visit Florida against the grandmother's wishes because, gosh darn it, the Misfit is loose. Who is the Misfit? A wanted and dangerous criminal that has escaped from prison that the grandmother reads about in the papers, who is said to be traveling to Florida as well. Despite her protestations against the trip, grandmother insists on tagging along and is the first one ready to go in the car the morning of the trip. A little hypocritical, you're thinking? Just wait, you have no idea. Grandmother also brings the family cat Pitty Sing along. Pitty Sing, weird cat name, alright Flannery O'Connor, but we'll just roll with it. Grandmother secretly brings Pitty Sing along and hides her in a basket under her suitcase, even though she knows Bailey disapproves of them bringing the cat on trips. And ooh, does grandmother look fine as she sits and waits in the car? June Star and Wesley's mother wears slacks and a green handkerchief to tie up her hair, but the grandmother's wardrobe is described in excessive detail from her fancy hat to her cotton gloves. At the end of describing the grandmother's fancy dress and other apparel, Flannery O'Connor writes, "In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady." Possibly foreshadowing something. Death! Along the journey, the kids are brats, Bailey is a grump, and the grandmother reminisces about the Old South. Yeah, the Old South, not great. During their drive, the grandmother sees a poor black child standing in the doorway of a shack and remarks, "Oh, look at that cute little pickaninny." As the car drives past the child, she makes a derogatory remark about how those types of people don't have the things that the family does. The grandmother comments about how she would just love to paint this scene as they drive by. During the car ride, grandmother also shares one of those fun, folksy, racist jokes involving stereotypes about watermelon eating, which delights young Wesley. Like I said before, real great family. Later during the road trip, the family stops their car for some barbecued sandwiches and meet Red Sammy Butts, which is a fantastic name for a character. Red Sammy Butts is an annoying fat man who bosses around his wife and enjoys a nice conversation reminiscing about the good old days with the grandmother. The good old days when folks were more respectful and children knew how to talk to their elders. And what good old days are these people talking about? Moving on from Red Sammy Butts' store, the grandmother reminisces once again about the Old South and a spectacular plantation she visited when she was a younger lady. Charming. She wants to make a detour to see this plantation, but Bailey says no. In order to change Bailey's mind, the grandmother decides to tell a lie about how the old plantation had a secret hidden panel to lost gold, or secret hidden gold or something, whatever the kids are into, to TikTok compilations. This lie excites the kids, who then bang on the back seat and scream until Bailey caves in and decides to turn on a dirt road towards the supposed plantation with the hidden gold. As they're driving down the dirt road, however, the grandmother realizes she has made a terribly embarrassing mistake. She accidentally mixed up which state the plantation was actually in, and they are driving down a dirt road to nowhere. The grandmother is embarrassed by this, but decides not to say anything. Instead, she nervously shuffles her feet, which knocks over the basket containing Pity Sing, the cat. Pity Sing springs up on Bailey, which causes him to crash the car. The car rolls over into a ditch, and instead of, being concerned about her family or her own well-being, the grandmother is only initially concerned about Bailey being mad at her for bringing the cat. The grandmother, sturdier than you might imagine, crawls out of the car and waves down a vehicle she sees in the distance. The vehicle is described as being big, black, and hearse-like. A hearse is a car that they carry a casket in. Hearse-like, Flannery O'Connor. That couldn't be foreshadowing! The driver of this big black hearse-like automobile is a strange older man wearing glasses, no shirt, and a tight pair of blue jeans. Oh yes, he also has a hat and a gun. This strange man is accompanied by two boys, one a fat boy named Bobby Lee in black trousers and a red sweatshirt, and the other boy is named Hiram, a boy described wearing khaki pants, a blue striped coat, and a gray hat. The boys also have guns. The strange trio offer to help the family quick get their car back on the road, while the grandmother curiously eyes the shirtless man. Finally, the connection clicks. She's seen his face before. "You're the Misfit," she says excitedly. "Yes, ma'am," he answers, "but it would have been better for all of you if you hadn't recognized me." This is where A Good Man Is Hard to Find takes a turn into some serious dark Coen Brothers territory. The Misfit has his sidekicks Bobby Lee and Hiram take Bailey and Wesley into the yonder woods while he converses with the grandmother about his life, God, and the nature of good and evil. While her son and grandson are being led into a woods described as a dark gaping mouth, the grandmother waves her handkerchief and pleads with the Misfit, saying, "You wouldn't shoot a lady, would you?" Yes, she says this to try to defend herself while people with guns are taking away her son and grandson into the woods. And then 2 shots ring out. Bobby Lee and Hiram return with Bailey's shirt, which they give to the Misfit. The grandmother continues to ignore what is happening to her family and tries to plead with the Misfit, saying, "Listen, I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people." The Misfit simply responds, "No, ma'am. I am not a good man." Next, the mother and June Starr are escorted by Bobby Lee and Hiram into the woods. Again, 2 more gunshots ring out. The grandmother is now alone with the Misfit and begins to plead with the Misfit to turn to Jesus and pray. The Misfit says he doesn't pray and isn't interested in receiving Jesus' help. The grandmother begins to panic, muttering the words Jesus, Jesus, Jesus over and over again, but it's described as being more like cursing the name than praying. The grandma exclaims, "Jesus, you've got good blood. I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from nice people. Pray. Jesus, you ought not to shoot a lady. I'll give you all the money I've got." The Misfit and the grandmother then briefly discuss Christ's resurrection. I know, the conversation takes a turn for the strange. The Misfit says that Jesus was the only one who raised people from the dead, but that he shouldn't have done so because when he did, it threw everything off balance. In the Misfit's eyes, a person's only options after Christ's resurrection was to either throw away everything they had and follow Christ, or to enjoy humankind's brief existence the best way they could, through killing or some other meanness. The Misfit himself says in life there is no pleasure but meanness. The grandmother herself at this point mumbles to herself in a state of near delirium, "Maybe he," meaning Christ, "didn't raise the dead." The Misfit then launches into a passionate speech where he wishes out loud that he could have been there at the time of Christ's death and resurrection. The Misfit believes that if he was present at the time of Christ's resurrection, he could be a true believer in Christ's teachings. He could be a disciple of love, forgiveness, and eternal salvation, rather than simply be the killer who he is now. The Misfit is genuinely upset by this, and ironically seems to have given his spirituality more thought than the posh and ceremonious grandmother. Next, we have the most controversial and confusing moment in the whole story. In a shocking moment of clarity or stupidity, the grandmother tells the Misfit, "Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children." Then she reaches out to touch the Misfit. The Misfit recoils as if bitten by a snake and shoots the grandmother 3 times through the chest. She was a talker, wasn't she? Says Bobby Lee. She would have been a good woman, the Misfit says, if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Some fun, Bobby Lee says. Shut up, Bobby Lee, says the Misfit. It's no real pleasure in life. What? Wow, that's how it ends? But what does it mean? Okay, first let's talk about the grandmother and the line stating that she would only have been a good person if there was somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Ah, grandmother, so concerned with decorum, cotton gloves, and prayer, and not concerned at all with family, sacrifice, the plight of the poor and oppressed, and basically everything else Jesus says that we should care about. The grandmother is more concerned with being a lady than with actually being a good person. This is evident in her racist reactions during the road trip, but it's also evident in the active choices she continually makes that puts her and her family in the Misfits' clutches. What does the grandmother do that leads the family to such a devastating downfall? Let's start at the beginning. The grandmother claims to be upset about going to Florida, but is the first one ready to go in the car the morning of the trip. The grandmother chooses to take the dang cat Pitty Sing along, even though she knows Bailey disapproves of it. The grandmother chooses to bring up the plantation. The grandmother chooses to lie about the plantation in order to get the kids to whine and complain to their dad. The grandmother carelessly knocks the basket with Pitty Sing, causing the car accident. The grandmother chooses to flag down the Misfits passing hearse-like automobile. The grandmother chooses to announce the identity of the Misfit, and finally the grandmother chooses to touch the Misfit before getting 3 rounds of gunfire to the chest. A bad choice? Of course you think, but maybe not. A good man is hard to find is a testament to what happens when true human vulnerability, represented by the grandmother and the family, meet true malevolence, represented by the Misfit. The story is also about how Grace, while it is amazing, is not all naked angels and harps. But before we talk about Grace, let's go back to the family as a whole. The family isn't evil, they're just petty and fallible. If you read the story and didn't see yourself in the grandmother, or at least see the potential in yourself to be as selfish as the grandmother, then you didn't read the short story honestly. We all, at one time or another, are prideful, intentionally or unintentionally blind to the suffering and misfortunes of others, especially when those others happen to be the people that we should care about the most. The family is vulnerable, and so are we. But now let's talk about the Misfit. The Misfit is teased throughout the story as this sort of looming diabolical force that only exists in gossip and in the newspapers. In this sense, the Misfit only exists in the abstract for the family. This is a lot like how most of us experience evil. Evil and tragedy, most of us think, is something that happens to other people. So when we do encounter true malevolence, we are woefully unprepared for it most of the time. True evil is something we read about in history books or see dramatized in fictional and non-fictional accounts on TV. Evil's much different when we encounter it unexpectedly on the dirt road of life. There's a dirt road in the story. The Misfit is a character, but he is also a representation of malevolence. The Misfit and his hearse of death is roaming the highway of life, and a little bad character, a few bad choices, and some bad luck is all it takes to become a victim. A large part of the story, however, is open to interpretation, and it's all because of the grandmother's final act. The last words the grandmother utters. Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. Was this final moment insight or insanity? The answer is neither. It is instead a moment of pure grace. Grace ain't always a nice thing. Instead, grace can be understood as unmerited mercy that God gave to humanity by sending his son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross, thus securing mankind's eternal salvation from sin. At least that's what I read on the internet. I don't know. Comment in the comments if I got the definition of grace wrong. Grace is also something that we can obtain to become more Christ-like ourselves. After the grandmother goes through a period of doubting her own, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" she decides to reach out to the Misfit as one of her own. After being rejected and killed by the Misfit, the grandmother lies dead in the ditch with her legs crossed under her like a child's, and her face smiling up at the cloudless sky. I know it's grisly, and I might be reading too much into this, but am I? What is more Christ-like than seeing Christ within another person, no matter how terribly they have persecuted you and your family? What is more Christ-like than reaching out to the sinner as one of your own children and then being killed for it? That's a question I leave to the philosophers and to the theologians. We'll see you in the comments, I'm sure. But that's Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. Be sure to like, subscribe, and to watch out for the Misfit both within and without. Keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you next time.